when we move along, we're going to have to move along to the females.
He was never one of my goddesses.
And he wouldn't want to be remembered as such.
I think not. So what did I do? You want to go on with that in 66?
Yes. Whenever you're ready.
In 1966...
Can you say around the time that I did the Fonda interview, so you just tie in the Fonda interview with 66 and then go from there?
No, I did this. I did the Fonda interview in, I think, January of 66. And that was, I wasn't doing theater then. I had actually quit theater a couple years back because I was doing so many bad plays and having such a lousy time of it that I said, I don't want to do this anymore. I got back into it later, but that's different. So I wasn't doing theater, but I was, let me see, I got into the whole hippie thing, the 60s, that was starting. And I dived into that 100%. I thought, that's fun. Because, you know, life wasn't really fun in the 50s and early 60s. The early 60s, first half of the 60s was just like leftover 50s. But then the Beatles came in and the whole psychedelic thing started to happen, and then I started having a real good time. And in the middle of that, I got this dancing gig. A friend of mine, Randy Barcelo, a very dear guy, not around anymore. He was a dancer with the New York City Opera. And he couldn't make one performance of a show, of one of the operas. What was it? Love of Three Oranges? I think that's the name of it. I wasn't much of an opera freak. He said, it's very simple. You have one little dance bit to do, and I told them that I know somebody who could replace me. So don't worry, I'll get someone and I'll teach him what he has to do. And they said, okay. So he comes and he says, so you want to do it? Yes, always say yes. Always say yes. I didn't care about opera, but I figured, okay, I'll try that. So I went there and worked out the choreography and everything. And it turned out to be a lot of fun. Because the way the New York City Opera, this was when it was at Lincoln Center, and maybe they're still there. I think they're still there. Yeah? And the way it was configured is the main floor was, of course, the stage and the star dressing rooms. The second floor was the makeup room and all of the women singer chorus members. The third floor was a nest of sexual perversion. There was one huge dressing room for all of the male chorus singers and another dressing room for the supers and the dancers.
Sounds like the rubber room of the Studio 54.
I'll take your word for it. The smaller dressing room that I was in, it's like right across the hall from the chorus. Well, it was a hoot and a half to be up there. So I just volunteered. Not only I became one of their dancers, but they didn't use dancers that much, but they always needed supers. And it was always so much fun to be there with all these ragingly hormonal guys up there that I did a lot of super work. So I started that in 1966. That was the beginning of that, and that went on for about 6 seasons. I was doing extra work on television or in movies, and I was getting published a lot. That was a year that I had a lot of stuff that I'd written being published.
What sort of things?
Just movie star shit, you know, interviews and articles and stuff. So I was in a transitional period. Do you want to hear about when I did Tosca on acid?
Yes,
Do we want to hear about Tusk on
Absolutely.
acid?
definitely.
I wanna
I
hear
think
that.
we.
Oh, we have a majority
I
here.
think most people want to hear that.
I had discovered well, I'd already discovered marijuana. That was way back. But LSD was all the rage, and I was curious about it. And I went on about 6 or 7 different trips over time. But this one time, a couple of friends came over, and one of them had like a toolbox full of every conceivable kind of drug you could imagine. So they came over Friday night, and we were going to stay the whole weekend. Totally ripped. That was the plan. And playing psychedelic records, and doing all that. And I said, I'm free the whole weekend, fine. So we start Friday night, nobody slept, everybody's just buzzing around, and it's about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon Saturday, and I'm weaving my way around the apartment, and I look at the calendar, and it said 2:30, matinee, Tosca. Holy shit, I'd forgotten all about that. Holy fuck! I had to go down there, walking all along 9th Avenue until I got to Lincoln Center on acid. And it's 1 foot at a time, 1 foot at a time. Be very careful what you do. I get there just in time. They say, oh, we're waiting for you, waiting for you. They threw the costume on me. And this is the first time I'd done Tosca with them on stage. We rehearsed it down in the rehearsal rooms. And so I knew where I was supposed to go and who I was supposed to be relating to. But I got out there, and what they didn't tell me was that as well as the pit orchestra, they were going to have some of the instruments on in the left wings and some in the right wings and some in the back of the stage. So you've got this music coming to you from all directions. I am trying very hard to do exactly as I was told. But suddenly this blast, talk about stereo. It was coming at me from all directions, and then the bishop comes in, he's swinging the mitre with real incense coming out of it. I don't know how I got through the performance, but I got through it. It was the only time I've ever been stoned at work, and I hadn't planned it that way, but I think I got through it. And I staggered back, and we continued our weekend.
Did you fool them?
They didn't know. I mean, I told them the next time I came in, did you know that I was stoned on acid when I did that show? Oh, I couldn't tell. This is embarrassing. They say, no, it's just the way you always act. That's embarrassing.
Oh my. So, were you into speed at all?
I got into speed. I wasn't into speed then. Like a couple years later, I got into speed, and I got kind of got into trouble with too much drugs. I was what they call a garbage head. I would take anything that's put in front of me. And the way I got back into doing shows, doing theater, as an actor, is one of my friends said, "Hey, I know this guy, and he's written this play, and it's going to be done off Broadway." It was some little box of a place, and I hadn't done any shows for a while, so I said, "Well, all right, yes." So I go and see it, and it turned out to be this play that was written on drugs, to be performed on drugs, for an audience on drugs. So I got into maybe 3 or 4 different plays of that ilk, and it was kind of fun, actually. And then I gradually sort of got back into doing theater from that.
No, you'd never stuck a needle in your arm.
That's the one thing I drew the line at. I knew when I was getting into all this drug shit that this could be trouble, and I'm not going to do needles. I never would do needles. I would swallow anything, I would smoke anything, I would snort anything, but I wouldn't do needles.
Now,
Because I knew that was going to be trouble.
now you knew there were people obviously around you who did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I knew what the death rate was. And so I didn't do needles. So it was maybe relatively easier to stop because I didn't have the needle stuff going on. But it was hard to stop. But I did, finally. But I was just doing that all the time. I was so into the 60s, that whole thing. You want to go into that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, you mean the '60s culture, the drug
Yeah.
culture, the
Yeah.
hippies,
Yeah.
yeah.
I had just, let me see, 1966 is the year I turned 30. So for the next 4 years, maybe, I got into this whole thing with the hippie thing, the whole hippie thing. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I loved rock and roll in the 60s. That's my favorite music ever. Oh my God, especially on drugs. Holy Moses, fabulous. That's why I never got into the beatnik thing. The music was terrible and the clothes were boring. The beatnik, the hippie thing, the clothes were fabulous and the music was unbelievable. And then the drugs, yeah. And I made a lot of friends. It was an interesting age for me to be in my early 30s doing that. Because everybody else who was doing that I knew was in their 20s. And sometimes early 20s, and sometimes teens. But I always had this thing where I always looked maybe 10 years younger than my actual age. So nobody knew how old I was. I mean, I wasn't withholding it. I would tell them if they asked me. But I was kind of accepted there. And the first time I had to meet a friend of mine at Columbia University during all those riots that went on there, it was like, oh, this is my first college campus. Because I never went to college. It's the first time in my life I was ever on a campus. And all the students there who were in the middle of it, I was in the middle of them, and I was just accepted as being one of the kids. But I was at an interesting age because I was young enough to enjoy all the good parts of it. But I started to get old enough to be able to also understand some of the really dumb parts of it. So I didn't go all the way into it. And then it wound up when I started getting back in theater again, that I would do all these theater things in the village with all these, all these psychedelic things in the village. And then I still was doing stuff uptown, with the Broadway crowd. And neither crowd could figure out, why do you keep going back there? What are you doing going to Broadway? What? What's that about? That's so establishment. And then in the uptown crowd kept asking me, why do you keep going down the village and doing those things in the village? So, I was straddling both.
It sounds like you were having a hell of a good time.
I was having a good time.
Did you mix your two groups of friends?
Let's get louder.
Did you mix your two groups of friends?
At least two groups. This was an interesting thing about the 60s. I was, like I said, I was into my early 30s. The main line they were using then, Abby Hoffman is the one who coined this phrase, don't trust anyone over 30. Well, Abby was the same age as me. I'd met him a few times. He was fun. He was a fun guy. But what he meant was people over 40, the over 40 generation. The people in our 30s during that revolution time were what I call the unheard from generation. And some of us went with the flow, you know, and some decided to stay with their suits and collars and ties and lipstick and hairdos and high heels. And I lost a lot of friends who decided to stay with the older folks, the straight folks, and made a lot of friends that were within the young folks. And it's not because I didn't want to be around them. I think they didn't want to be around me, or I was so busy being around the kids, having fun, that I didn't have time for them anymore. I don't know how that worked out, but I've met a couple of other people who were also in their 30s during that transition time. They had the same story. You had which one are you going to go with? You going to stay with the older ones, or are you going to go with the new ones? So I went with the new ones, but I kept my feet in the other water too.
So when you say straight, you mean those coat and tie people, not the
Yeah.
sexually straight people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if this is a good time to ask, but we were talking about the conundrum of your splitting yourself into three different people, and I guess maybe we're going back maybe to the 50s, so when you were a gay man and you had friends that you had on different levels. Is that is this like in the 50s or in the 60s, or where did that lie?
50s.
50s. Well, it was before it started to become okay to be yourself, but
Yeah,
we
that didn't
should go
happen
there.
until Stonewall, and that didn't happen until '69. So even with the hippie crowd, there was still, the gays were still, they were more or less accepted, but not thought much about. And so the three sections of friends I had, starting in the, I guess in the 50s, late 40s, into the 50s, through the 50s, I met so many people. I knew a hell of a lot of people back then that I was close to. There was a group of people who...
Well, hold on a second.
They're coming for me.
While we're being interrupted by the noise, I wonder if maybe we could stay with the 60s and you could tell us how things were changing, if they were starting to change in like 66 or before or after, as far as your freedom of being you is concerned.
Okay, ask me a question. Or did you just...
So maybe you could lead it in with like during that time, things were changing during that time, and then go ahead and tell us.
That was the time of demonstrations, the civil rights movement, women's rights, gay people. There was nothing for gay people, nothing about gay rights. That hadn't even been thought of yet. That never even occurred to anybody. But like we all, gay and straight, we were marching in the civil rights for black people. We were marching along with the women for women's rights, women's lib as they like to call it. But no such thing had happened for any gay people. That didn't happen until the very end of the 60s, in 1969, as a result of the Stonewall demonstration. And that's when organizations started forming in New York. It woke people up. It woke some gay people up, and they thought, how about us? It had never occurred to most of us that there was even a possibility that gay people, homosexuals, could fight for rights, because that's not what the history told us. We knew the history, and it was a horrible history. So I just, even during the whole hippy-dippy thing, I was still keeping that to myself.
Were you resentful that that you were marching for people for their rights, but that your rights were not being?
No, because it didn't occur to us even marching with other people for other causes, it never occurred to us, hey, we have a cause too. No, it never occurred to us. It was so, that's why it was such a shock to me when it happened, when it started.
When Stonewall, you mean?
Well, the result of Stonewall.
Around,
Well, Stonewall itself, but the result of Stonewall. It was so ingrained in us that we have to keep our dirty little secrets. Now, the three groups I'd been talking about, there was always a group of people who knew that I was gay, and that was mostly other gay men. Then there was a group of people who I deliberately lied to and continued to change pronouns. Oh, I had a great date with her last night in casual conversation, changing pronouns like crazy. Well, I was lying. And then there was the people that I just never mentioned anything about a sex life, a love life, a romantic life. I just never said anything at all. And I was always worried that somebody from this group of people, I mean, it wasn't one big group, it was scattered people. I'm just making them into groups. That somebody from this group is going to meet somebody from that group, because all my friends didn't know each other. You know, they were from different branches of my life. That somebody from this group is going to meet somebody from that group, and they're going to start exchanging notes, and I'll be discovered. You're worried about everything.
So when you went to Stonewall on that fateful night, you were at Stonewall during the riot, and you were playing the cat and mouse. If the cops came in, you were to go to your places and behave and act like straight men. The Stonewall was one place where you could dance.
That's
yes?
the only reason I was there.
That's why you were there.
I didn't even go to bars. I didn't drink.
So Stonewall, tell us about Stonewall, and tell us about how you were there and what went on, what you can remember, and then how it affected your life and the life of the gay population.
Sounds like a very big question. Okay. July? Was it July? 69? Summer. Sometime in the summer. I was going with this guy, John, and he loved to dance, and I loved to dance. And we wanted to go dancing. And the first thing we thought about, well, where can you go to dance? Same-sex dancing. Stonewall. They have same-sex dancing. Let's go to Stonewall. I'd been in there once before, I think. And it was down in the village. So we got on the subway, we went to the Stonewall, and the dancing was the way the bar was configured, you walk in and the bar is on that side, and on that side is maybe just a railing or something with a little shelf for drinks or something. So you walk through, and then there's an entrance into the back room. It's kind of an L shape, as I recall. And that's where the music was, and that's where the dancing was, and tables. So everybody knew what the process was. If the bar was going to be raided, they push a button, lights flicker. Guy behind the bar pushes a button, lights flicker. That meant go to a table or stand by yourself. Don't be talking to anybody else. Act like you're here alone. So at one point, did the light, I don't even remember if the light went on for this, but some cops came in, maybe half a dozen, 4 or 6, for their payoff. The whole bar scene, the whole gay bar scene especially, was run by the mafia. All of it was mafia run. Now we all knew this, and there was a chance that it could be raided at any time, whenever they felt like it, at whim. The officers could come streaming in and throw you in the paddy wagon. I have to tell you that I don't remember the whole thing sequentially. I really don't, because it was so insane. I remember flashes. Suddenly, we hear in the main bar, suddenly, it was a racket, a loud racket of noise. And we started spilling into the, I remember, next thing I remember is it's in this main section of the bar, and people are throwing bottles at the cops, and they're pushing them around, and they're screaming at them, and bottles are being hurled, mirrors breaking, and it was a full-scale riot.
Now the doors were barricaded at some point.
They weren't
right?
barricaded then.
Mm-hmm.
They had just come in.
Okay.
And there's this big mob. Or not a big mob, but it was the people who were in the bar at the time. And we were beating up on cops. I didn't have a history of that. There was no history of fags beating up cops, you know? And it spilled out into the street, and then all of the village people, so to speak, got wind of this, and there's this big riot going on at Stonewall. So they all kept running up, and soon it was the whole street was filled with people. And it's this riot of people were setting fire to police cars. And at one point, I remembered this, but I couldn't believe that it happened. A bunch of guys grabbed onto a parking meter, cemented into the ground, and pulled the parking meter out of the sidewalk. That was when, in the middle of all this mob, the cops who were originally there, just the cops that were there, they barricaded themselves inside the bar to be safe from us. And that parking meter was used as a barricade. Now the cops, meanwhile, while they were in there, called the station and said, "We need reinforcements here." And suddenly there's cops all over the place. And everybody is just going bonkers. And I had some very strange nights in New York bars before, but I wasn't this kind of a strange night in a bar. I can't remember things chronologically.
Did this start out as a roust? Something.
It started out they came in for their payment.
Okay.
You pay us off, and we'll let you stay open. That was what had been going on all those years back to before I was born. That was the system. That was the setup. If you went into a gay bar, you knew that might happen. Usually didn't, but it could. And if they wanted, they could just take Manny, Mo, and Jack and throw them in the paddy wagon and drive them downtown.
What started it? What ignited it?
I don't know. What ignited the riot?
The riot.
I have no idea. Because I was in the back room when we heard all of this stuff going on. I don't know what started it. I wish I could help you. I wish I would know. I would love to know. But I don't remember going home. I don't remember if I went home with John, reconnected with John or not. I don't remember any of it.
Were there arrests?
I think I heard that there were some.
Yeah. But you got out of it. You weren't injured either, right?
No, nobody was injured. And I didn't know until last year why, and I'd wondered all these years, why didn't I ever hear a single gunshot fired? Isn't that weird? All these cops, and no one fired a gun. There was no shots. There was nothing in the papers about gunshots. Nobody ever talked about Stonewall and talked about people being shot. How come? Last year, on PBS, there was a documentary about Stonewall. I watched it. And among the people they interviewed was the head cop of the first group of cops that went into the bar. Older guy, you know, and he's got this baseball cap on with NYPD on it. And he said that he knew that if one gunshot was fired, another gunshot would be fired, and it would be a disaster. There'd be bodies all over the place. So he went quickly to every one of the cops, and he addressed them by name. Fred, Stan, whatever. He said, look, don't you take out your gun. I don't want to hear one gunshot fired. Keep your gun in its holster. Do not fire the gun. Because if you do, and I hear that you do, I'm going to make sure that you spend the rest of your career walking a beat in Staten Island.
And this was a cop that was there. Who was
He was
interviewed.
telling the other cops.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
He was the cop that was interviewed.
Right.
Because he was, I guess, the head cop. He went to all of them, through all the ruckus, told them, don't you dare fire a shot. I didn't know that. All these years, and I never knew that.
So you expected they would.
Oh, of course. I couldn't figure out why they didn't.
Mm.
I didn't think about that at the time. I don't think I did. But who knows?
So this was kind of the shot that heard around the gay world.
Oh yeah, it was all over the place because that mob that got in front of the that came when it was obvious that there was a riot starting, and all the people, that turned into maybe a week long of nightly riots at Stonewall as a result of it. It went on and on and on. Now I just went back to my life. I wasn't part of that. And it led to people forming a gay rights, you know, the first of the gay rights organizations that eventually popped up everywhere. I wasn't part of that. I wish I could take credit for that, but I wasn't. I just went back to my regular life. I was in rehearsals for a play, so I went to rehearsal the next day thinking, well, that was a weird night.
Did John go back to any of it?
Hmm?
Did John go back to any of it?
No. No. We talked about it later. I don't think he did. Did he? There really isn't any more I could tell you.
No. Maybe we'll
Edit.
maybe we won't
Yeah,
have to.
okay.
We gotta think. How'd it
Still,
go?
oh yeah, no, it's going good. I was just talking to Christina about maybe just varying the frame a little bit, zooming out a little bit
Yeah.
for a couple other questions, just to, so it's not just as, how does this look? You want to look at it?
Oh.
Yeah. look.
I can flip it around.
Oh,
it
that's right.
flips
We
them
want
to
that
the other
thing.
side. Well,
They trying
yeah,
to keep me
to the
here.
other side.
I'm just thinking come out a little bit.
I hate the look.
Yes, Clay.
Only bad part is we don't want to get too much of that.
Too much of what?
The computer and light.
So tomorrow USA Today is coming over.
You know,
You're just a star.
It's good. I mean, it looks good to me.
Okay, so
And
Okay.
we got the pictures fuzzed out a little bit, and
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So
I
something like
hope
that.
they will want to talk to other people about talking books because that's what he was interested in when he called me. And it was supposed to be about the Salinger book.
Mm-hmm.
But then he started asking me questions
great.
about just doing audiobooks, and he seemed very interested.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, it's a room full of actors, Ray. If they ask us questions, we will answer.
Oh, that I know, but I hope he does.
Okay, don't. I'm a fly on the wall. I'm just.
I think the Fonda thing is going to be really good. And we already did Stonewall.
Yeah.
We talked about Stonewall. We
Okay.
went from 1966 when they did the Fonda interviews into what? No, what was Stonewall?
69.
69.
69.
How appropriate.
That is good. I mean, we moved
Oh, you
forward.
did take out the Ray Hagen's greatest hits.
Now, here it is.
Okay.
What is that?
I brought them over to John to listen to. Some of my old cabaret shit. He wanted to hear it.
I'd like to hear some of your. Sure would love to hear some of your cabaret stuff.
Well, it's right behind you in a cassette player if you want.
I've got a cassette player at home. Which these?
No.
Exciting. Why?
Was what scary?
The thought of, I guess the thought of what the future could be.
No. It
Were you
wasn't.
excited?
I was pissed off enough to last me, I knew then, the rest of my life. I'd had enough. I wasn't excited. Are we filming?
Mhm.
Oh. When I decided to stop hiding, I decided to stop hiding from everybody just after I moved here. Because I'm going to have a new life here in Washington, and I simply did not want to have to keep on bisecting my life into different areas. And who did I tell what to? So I wasn't going to do that anymore. I suddenly no longer cared what people thought. Who am I trying to impress? Strangers who I never met, who don't give a rat's ass about who I am, nor I them? Why am I lying to impress them? Why am I lying to impress anybody? If they can't be my friend, knowing I'm gay, then they weren't my friend at all, because it's bigotry, and I'm just usually didn't make real close friends with bigots. I didn't like bigots. So, it applies to me too. Why shouldn't it apply to me too? And I started it with the people I was then working with at the Library of Congress in the recording studio. And I'd figured out a very saucily clever way to do it. I don't know how it occurred to me to do it this way, but it worked. Whenever the question would come up, I would, in any way, like who are you dating or something, I would simply tell the truth in such a way that it would seem, oh, I thought you already knew that. I just made believe that I thought that, oh, I thought you already knew that. And just brush it off that way. It worked. But what amazed me was when I started telling all my old New York friends about it. Like, surprise, they didn't know. They knew. They all knew. That was embarrassing.
You thought they didn't.
Uh-huh. I thought they fell for my shit. They knew. It wasn't a surprise to anybody.
But you were. It sounds like you were still kind of on the stage about it.
What do you mean?
Well, that you said you had this thing going at the library, and it sounds like kind of a performance. You're not truly being just Ray Hagen. You're still being that part of you that was performing.
I've been doing that my whole life. I'm doing that now. I always do that. Everybody, whenever you're meeting people or dealing with people, you're performing. You're presenting yourself to people in a way that you want to present yourself to them. I always do that.
Did you
That's
have
in
any?
everybody?
Did you have any bad reactions?
From one person who decided that, oh, well, I don't want anything to do with that. Never heard from him again. But I think that was all. I don't think anything, no, just that one person. But you see, the thing is, I no longer cared. That was the difference. I no longer cared. I really got the monkey off my back, or whatever it was.
Well, if that person cared and that person didn't like who you were, then you didn't really care for that person.
No, because obviously it's an unthinking bigot, and I was never close and friendly with uptight bigots. So he wasn't my friend after all. I was very
Can we stop for 1 second?
Yeah.
We're getting.
That engine. It's a fire truck engine.
I don't hear anything.
I do.
We hear it.
Yeah, I hear it. I feel like
Oh,
we're
it's a truck.
on the move here. I was wondering if we have the time, the energy,